Well, good morning. Thanks for joining me live here, or if you're watching later, thanks for joining me recorded later. It's September 3rd here at the ranch, coming to you from the barn, and I want to say hook 'em horns. They won their first game yesterday. But on a sadder note, we said goodbye to a music legend Friday night. Jimmy Buffett passed away. And for those of you who know me know that I grew up in the Florida Keys in the 60s and 70s, about the time that Jimmy was living down there and writing a lot of songs about the Keys way of life. And I always thought that I would end up living in the Keys forever and being a boat captain of some sort. And it's funny how things work out. God had a different plan for my life, although I still get on the water. I still go to the Keys. I still have boats. Living the cowboy life up here in Okeechobee is what I prefer. But my brother and my nephew have carried on the captain's way of life. They're both fishing guides down there in Isla Mirada. So, anyways, it's sad to lose Jimmy. He not only wrote some great songs about the Keys way of life, but he did write a few cowboy songs. A couple songs that I liked. One of them was Brahm of Fear. He wrote Livingston Saturday Night. He wrote Cowboy in the Jungle. Livingston's Gone to Texas, and some other Texas songs. He had a Texas connection as well. So when I'm driving out to Texas or Oklahoma, going to some horse event, going hunting or something, I can't help when I go over that I-10 bridge, Mobile Bay, thinking about Jimmy. And probably my most favorite song of his was The Captain and the Kid, about a story that took place out there in Mobile Bay about Jimmy and his grandfather. So anyways, I see Kelly's checked in. Good morning, Kelly. Anyone else who's brave enough to say hello in the comment section, please do so. I'd like to know you're there. And let's start out with a word of prayer. Dear Father, I want to send up prayers to the Big Bend area of Florida. A lot of folks trying to put their lives back together up there after the storm, after the hurricane. One friend of mine in particular, my close friend Tom, lives in Homosassa, had water in his house. They're trying to put that all back together. It's no fun. Also want to remember the folks out in Hawaii having to deal with such a great, horrific loss of life, loved ones, and property, trying to put their lives back together and make sense of it all, go on. I just ask that you comfort them in the way that only you can, both through your spirit and through your people. I've asked that each of us search our heart, that if we are called by you to get involved in some way, that we gladly respond to that call. I also want to send up prayers to Gainesville, Florida, down to the Florida Keys, here in Okeechobee, and up in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio areas. I have close friends and relatives in all these places that I know that are in need of prayer. So I ask all these things in your blessed name, that your name may be glorified above all else. Amen. So, I also want to say a shout out to my stepfather, my beloved stepfather Chuck, who's got a birthday today. So he's another great Jimmy Buffett fan. I know he's sad about losing old Jimmy, but we're going to go back into Ephesians chapter 4, carry on with our study there, taking it slow. Maybe some people think taking it too slow, but I found that every time I read through these verses that I learn more. So I'd like to share some of those things with you as we go along. And today we're going to, just to get our bearings, I'll go back and reread the verses we've been studying for the last couple of days, or last couple of weeks, months. And let's see here. Get on the right page. Let's pick it up with Ephesians 4. Let's just pick it up with verse 22, where it says that ye put off concerning the former manner of life, or the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt according to its deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind. And that ye put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man the truth to his neighbor, for we are members one of another. So, as you remember last week, we read through the first parts of chapter 1 and chapter 2 in Ephesians, where Paul rehearses the truth about each of us so that we can believe the gospel not only for ourselves, but also in relationship, we can believe the gospel for others. Because in any relationship, if at least one person is not believing the gospel for the other and for themselves, the relationship's going to have difficulties. So as we make the transition from chapters 1, 2, and 3 in Ephesians into chapters 4, 5, and 6, we're going to encounter a number of relationship commands that Paul gives. And the warning is that without a solid knowledge of the gospel for yourself and for others, the very best that we can do in trying to obey these commands is to become religious. And when we become religious, we become judgmental. And being judgmental causes relationships to not grow, but to fall apart. So as we go into this next verse, I just want to keep that in mind, where it says in verse 26, and this is our verse for today, it says, be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath. And I'll go on into verse 27, where it says, neither give place to the devil. So it's saying, be angry, but sin not. And don't let the sun go down upon your wrath. And I'll paraphrase the next verse, don't give the devil a foothold. Don't even give him a toehold. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, I talked about part of the Alpha series written by my pastor and neighbor, my friend, John Glenn. And he has a chapter in there devoted to emotions. And we talked about the various categories of emotions, ranging from the very pleasant emotions of love, joy, and peace, among others. But those three are good enough for the purposes of discussion, ranging from love, joy, and peace down to negative emotions, which are anger, concern, and anger. Oh, and pain, anguish. And then finally, there's a third category of emotions, which are sinful emotions. And these are hatred, or you could add in there bitterness or resentment, hatred, self-pity, and anxiety, at the opposite end of the spectrum. Now, the reason that they're sinful is not because God just arbitrarily said, well, we need some rules around here, so I'm going to give you some rules that you need to keep. And one of those rules is that thou shalt not hate, thou shalt not feel sorry for yourself, and thou shalt not be anxious or worry. Now, he did say all those things in his word, but it wasn't that he just arbitrarily decided that we needed some rules. Those commands were for our own benefit, because each of these three sinful emotions, anxiety, self-pity, and hatred, leads to death in one form or another. It either leads to death in a relationship, or death in one's own mental health and physical health, even in the most extreme case, murder. That's why Jesus said, if you hate your brother, you've murdered him already. You've already killed him. You've already broken one of the 10 commandments. There's no weasel clause with hatred. And the reason there's no weaseling around hatred is because it will kill. But today we're going to talk about anger. Right? And this verse says, be angry and sin not. It says, be angry. Now, as I explained a couple weeks ago, at least in my experience and in my observation of others, is that most of the time we're not in a state of love, joy, and peace. It would be nice if we were, but most of the time we're not there. Most of the time we're experiencing some form of anger or concern or anguish or grief. That's where we are most of the time. These are negative emotions and they're unpleasant, but they're a part of our lives because they're necessary. And we're going to go today and talk and read in Matthew an account of Jesus getting very angry, but not sinning. Now, in my mind, the reason that we need to experience concern, we need to experience grief and anguish, and then we need to experience anger, is because they're motivators. See, if I'm sitting here in love, joy, and peace, I'm not going to move. I don't want to screw this up. I'm going to stay right here. I'm not going to do a thing. Why? Because I'm experiencing love, joy, and peace. Why would I take a chance on messing that up? See, my only motivation is to sit right here. But if I'm experiencing some anger, if I'm experiencing some concern, if I'm experiencing some anguish or pain or grief, I'm motivated to do something about it. So anger, even though it's unpleasant, will motivate you to deal with whatever's causing the source of anger, but in a healthy way. Because the only other alternative is hatred. The only other alternative is resentment or bitterness. And hatred, resentment, or bitterness kill. They're not good for you. They're not good for other people. And we can't live there. It's destructive. That's why the verse 26 says, be angry. I think it's 26. Yes, 26 says, be angry, but don't sin. Don't give the devil a toehold. Don't give place to the devil. Don't give him a chance to keep you there. Don't give him a chance to encourage you based on your knowledge of good and evil to deteriorate into resentment, bitterness, or hatred. Use that anger as a source of motivation to deal with the problem in a healthy way. So I want to give Jesus' example, one of his many examples, in a story that we're all familiar with, and that is, it's actually recorded in all four Gospels. And whenever you see a story recorded in all four Gospels, it's probably pretty important, don't you think? And there is a little caveat to all four on this, and I'll explain that to you as we go along. But let's turn over to Matthew. Let's see. Matthew chapter 21, verse 12. And this story chronologically falls right after the story that I reviewed for you again back in around Easter time on Palm Sunday, because this actual story takes place on Palm Sunday, and it was right after Jesus put on that colt starting demonstration by riding that colt that had never been ridden, that no man had ever sat upon, riding him bareback through a cheering, waving mob down a rocky hillside into a rocky valley and up another rocky slope from the Mount of Olives into the city of Jerusalem. That miracle that Jesus performed that maybe only a horseman can appreciate. But right after that, the next story that's recorded for us is Jesus going into the temple. Now, I said this story was recorded in all four Gospels. And if you have a Bible like mine, it will, just a footnote I'm going to give you here is that it tells you the other references of the other Gospels, and it references Luke 19 as well as Mark 11. It also references John chapter 2. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a side note here. This story of Jesus going into the temple and dealing with the corruption in the temple happened on more than one occasion. And the occasion and the account that John gives in chapter 2, where Jesus goes into the temple and he plats out a whip. He braids a whip. And I have an object or a prop, object lesson, a prop for you here. This is a cow whip. It said Jesus braided a whip out of small cords. This cow whip is braided out of small cords, and it was actually braided by my pastor John. And I'm happy to have it. I use it when I have occasion. But this is similar to the whip that Jesus might have used on that day. But that particular time was not the same event that happened. It's just a similar event. It's not the same event that we're reading about today because it did happen on a Passover, but not the same Passover, because in the next chapter, we find that John the Baptist is still alive. And by the time that Jesus arrived in Jerusalem on the last Passover before he was crucified, where the Palm Sunday event took place, John the Baptist had already been executed, and many other events had happened. I don't know how much time has spanned in between. Perhaps somebody has studied that out and could tell us, but I'm going to tell you that I believe that these were two separate occasions. But the occasion we're going to read about right now is where I want to focus on this issue of dealing with anger and why anger is necessary in our lives, but it must be managed. So in verse 12 it says, "And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. And he said unto them, It is written, My house shall not be called, or shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves." Okay, so just to give you a little background about, well, what are they talking about the people selling doves and these money changers? Well, when you came to Passover, every year the whole countryside was required to come and celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem at the temple. And part of the Passover was to bring animal sacrifices, not money sacrifices, animal sacrifices. But to them who lived, a great distance away, most of them traveling by foot, most of the folks were not wealthy enough to have a horse to ride or a wagon to be pulled by a beast of burden. They walked. And to bring one of their own animals to the sacrifice, for the sacrifice, was not very practical. So, in the name of convenience, the officials at the temple would sell them animals, for example, a dove, because the dove was an acceptable sacrifice animal. It was a clean animal. It was kosher, you might say. They would bring a dove, or they would be able to buy a dove or another animal using money. So it was convenient for them to sell an animal at home, take the money, bring it to Jerusalem on their journey, which may be several days walking on the road. And then once they arrived in Jerusalem, to use the money to buy a sacrifice animal for the Passover. But there was one caveat to this. See, the religious Jews didn't want any filthy money in their temple. They didn't want any of that Caesar money. They didn't want any of that Roman money. So for your convenience, they would exchange that Roman money for temple money for a small fee. It's kind of like the world we live in today. For your convenience, you no longer have to carry cash. We'll give you this plastic card, and you can get the things you need with this plastic card, but there's a small fee attached. Money changers. So these money changers had a good business going on. These people selling sacrificial animals, most likely at inflated prices, had a good business going on, all in the name of convenience. We want to make your religion convenient. We're looking out for you while we're getting rich. And this was all condoned by the religious leaders. In fact, this is how they made their living for the most part. So Jesus saw that, these mostly peasants were being taken advantage of, and it made him angry. Kind of like the way it makes me angry when I see some TV preacher, some slick TV preacher, or some other teacher, pastor, priest, minister, pushing some prosperity doctrine on people who are not very well off and guilting them into giving money while the preacher is maintaining some lavish lifestyle. Makes me angry. Maybe it makes you angry too. How do I keep from hating these guys? Yeah. So here's what Jesus did. He went in there and he turned the place upside down. And he says, in the red letters, it says, "It is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves." Then in the next verse, he said, "And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them." It's amazing, after cleaning out the temple, he quickly turned his attention to the needs of the very people who were most critically in need of aid. The same people that maybe were being taken advantage of. And he healed them. He healed the blind. He healed the lame. Verse 15, it says, "And when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying in the temple, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were very displeased." So Jesus disrupted commerce, turned around and did great miracles for the people, and it pissed off the religious leaders. Why? Well, think of it. Their livelihood had just been disrupted, and now their authority is being challenged. Because rather than taking advantage of the people, using the religion to take advantage of the people, Jesus is healing the people. He's healing the people. And that is how he avoided slipping into the temptation of hatred. That's how he avoided giving the devil a toehold. The same way he avoided the devil getting a toehold at 40 days that he was tested in the wilderness. Because during that testing, Jesus experienced a lot of anguish. 40 days without food or water hurts. It can cause you to slide into beyond despair and self-pity. Certainly, the devil tested him in other ways. Well, if you're the Son of God, jump off this cliff and let the angels catch you. Prove it. Jesus said, I don't need any proof. I know who I am, and you do too. So turning back to our story, he says, when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things he did, well, they didn't think it was so wonderful. And the children crying in the temple. It's interesting because he's saying the children, people were, in church, if a baby cries, they usher him out, embarrassed. Here Jesus is saying, no, let him cry. They're saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. And he said unto them, hearest thou what these say? And Jesus said unto him, and by the way, it wasn't just infants, it was also adults. The same adults that were wildly cheering while he was riding that colt into the city. He says, have you never read, verse 16, out of the mouth of babes and sucklings hast thou perfected praise? Out of the mouth of babes. We still use that phrase today when a young child says something that's profoundly adult and really puts the adults to shame. And he left them and he went out of the city into Bethany and lodged there. So how did Jesus deal with his anger? He did what had to be done, and then he moved on. Simple as that. He did what had to be done. He did what was necessary for the benefit of others. Then he moved on and continued to do things that were for the benefit of other people. That's how he dealt with his anger in a healthy way. Was it necessary? Yeah. Those people were being preyed upon. He did it and he moved on. That's the way we have to do it. I mean, it sometimes it just suits our flesh to dwell and let our anger continue to smolder and not deal with it. That's why he says, be angry and sin not. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. In other words, deal with it now. Deal with it today. Don't put it off. But sometimes it's better for us to play the victim and sit there and recite and rehearse over and over again why we're the victim and why it's okay for us to have resentment, why it's okay for us to be bitter, why it's okay for us to dwell. But the warning is that don't give the devil a toehold. Deal with it today, and then it's done. Move on. Because tomorrow is going to bring its own problems. So that's your good news for this week. I hope you don't have many problems, but you probably will. Because that's the way life is. Deal with it. Move on. God bless. Till next week. Adios.